You can ask an acutely ill patient, is this your first time for COVID or second or third time? Every patient should be asking that. The U.S. military is not keeping track of this. The major sports teams are not keeping track of this. Doctors' offices are not keeping track of this. They're keeping track of vaccines, but they're not keeping track of who's had the prior illness. This is the most recent risk stratification paradigm that I've conceptualized, that no risk for hospitalization and death is having a well-documented case of COVID-19. That's the best. Then we move through other comorbidities. Dr. Banerjee mentioned that obesity is actually slightly a more powerful risk factor even than older age. But you can, very few people are truly at risk for hospitalization and death. Very few people. In October of 2020, Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford, Martin Kulldorff and Sunetra Gupta from Oxford published the Great Barrington Declaration. Who signed the declaration in the room? Okay. The Great Barrington Declaration said we can do risk stratification, and only the highest risk people need some special protection. The Great Barrington Declaration said we should not lock down. We should not do anything else to society to protect the highest risk, that people are, we're going to get through the pandemic. Turns out the Great Barrington Declaration was the pathway. And it was a giant mistake that the WHO, the CDC, and all the other country authorities ignored the Great Barrington Declaration, which was signed overall by 1 million individuals. Third point, COVID-19 is a treatable illness. This is the first worldwide pandemic that was treatable. Notice that film that featured the Tedros, no mention of treatment. Tedros had nothing for treatment, no ammo, nothing. A complete and total mental lapse on early, a lapse. A complete failure by the WHO to focus on treatment. A small number of people needed treatment to avoid two bad outcomes, hospitalization and death. And if people got ill at home, provided they weren't hospitalized or died, that would have been a victory for society. WHO, not mentioned, will go down in history as a complete and total failure of that organization. And that movie just memorializes that oblivion. These are the two papers that I helped bring to the literature, making the point that this is a treatable illness. And what we relied on was called the precautionary principle. We only need to treat a number of people, like this is a mass casualty event, that we needed a signal of all the available evidence, acceptable safety, and we can use drugs in combination. Very important. We cannot wait for large, prospective, double-blind, placebo-controlled, multi-drug trials. Years into it, there still has not been such a large, well-designed multi-drug trial. We're 3 years into it. Large clinical trials. I'm an allopathic medicine doctor. It takes 2 to 4 years to do a large randomized trial and another 2 years to publish it. This is not on the time frame for the traditional evidence-based medicine, wait for a large clinical trial. This is like a mass casualty event. This had to rely on doctors using judgment and making careful observations in order to move things forward. It's very, very important. The WHO not even recognizing treatment, and other doctors who sat back said that we have to wait. We should let people be hospitalized and die, not treat until we have a large body of randomized. That was the most ridiculous suggestion that I letters to the editor, to the American Journal of Medicine, multiple of them. Duke University and McGill and Monash in Australia and from Brazil. And they all said you didn't have enough evidence to propose treating patients. And I don't need evidence. I need their help, because people are getting sick and we need to use our best judgment. What we learned is that the illness can be conceptualized with a proliferation phase, a cytokine or inflammation phase, and then thrombosis that ultimately leads to hypoxemia. The thrombosis was unique to this. That doesn't occur in influenza. Said, oh, this is just influenza. No, it isn't. I've managed sick patients and I've examined the lungs of people acutely ill. I've managed them face to face. It's a different illness. It's not influenza. You see the signs and symptoms in the time course. Through the Delta outbreak, it was about a 30-day illness. The majority of people who died in hospital, and typically beyond 30 days. That meant we had a long time to organize treatment. Our responses are shown on top of intracellular anti-infectives, corticosteroids, immunomodulators, and platelet anticoagulant drugs. This is one of many protocols. It's called the McCullough protocol. And you can see here, it moves through of treatments. I can tell you, I just reviewed this morning. I sit here today, there are 30 total different medicinal interventions for COVID-19. 33 randomized trials have been done. 33. This protocol here outlines about 4 to 6 drugs that need to be used in the nation. At the very top, it's getting fresh air, using nasal virucidal washes and sprays and gargles, which I'll review with you, have a very good evidence base. And then we move into risk stratification. Left side of the screen are no prescription therapeutics, simply nutraceuticals and supplements. And then through the middle and to the right, getting into a sequence of drugs, which used in the hospital simply can be used at home and earlier. But let me just give you the numbers. The most controversy antivirals, hydroxychloroquine, we are up to 380 studies with hydroxychloroquine, randomized trials demonstrating about a 23% improvement in the trials overall, about a 73% reduction in death as a singular endpoint, small numbers of endpoints. So hydroxychloroquine has an evidence base. It's in about 24 government and NGO guidelines. Ivermectin, 95 studies, 45 randomized trials, about a 51% reduction in death, 4% improvement in clinical condition. Ivermectin, again, small trials, but aggregated shows a treatment effect. Colchicine, something I've used widely in my practice, 43 studies, 23 randomized trials, including the largest clinical trial in all, the Corona trial. That was a prospective double-blind, multi-center, the best done trial that exists, about a 17% treatment effect. Budesonide, 10 studies, 4 randomized trials, a 38% treatment effect. Those of you in India would be interested to know curcumin, 23 studies, 18 randomized trials, about a 39% overall improvement rate. And then vitamin D, I'll just mention as an update, 104 studies, 25 randomized trials, 34% improvement rate, 37% associated reduction in death. And we can go on and on. So none of these protocols rely on a single drug, and no single drug is necessary nor sufficient. So we've collaborated with Dr. Eugenia Brentos in El Salvador, does not use hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, but uses 4 to 6 drugs, gets people through the illness. Dr. Sankarat Chetty in Durban, South Africa, the same thing. So treatment protocols do not rely on single drugs. And the only reason why people are hospitalized is because they have not received early home treatment. That's the reason why they end up being hospitalized. This paper I did with the Italians, Fazio and colleagues, showed early treatment means treating within the first 3 days of illness. The first 3 days. That's the goal. United States, by October of 2020, we had a home treatment guide. The U.S. government or worldwide followed this home treatment guide, which we published with Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. This roadmap, my estimates are 2/3 of the hospitalizations and deaths that occurred in the United States could have been avoided. 2/3. because there was a learning curve. We have probably about a 95% treatment effect. Point number 4, this is really point number 5, I'm sorry, the hot button, is that the vaccines are not sufficiently safe or effective. And I think people have learned that. I know this has gone all the way up to the Supreme Court of India, but I'll make a few points. Since the vaccines, it's been one set of bad news after another. There are about 100 vaccines in development and clinically available. I think the number's about 20 vaccines, and unfortunately, it's been bad news all the way. Pfizer, our lead manufacturer in the United States, the messenger RNA vaccine, within days of release of their drug, Pfizer logged 1,223 deaths shortly after the vaccine within 90 days of release. People dying of the vaccine, not of COVID, but dying of the vaccine. The US FDA tried to block information to Americans for 55 years. The World Council for Health, as of June 22, after multiple stern warnings in 2021, performed a pharmacovigilance report of all the major safety databases, of which there's 39 and 4 major ones, included, as you can see here, recall all the vaccines off the market. All the vaccines. So if you believe the vaccine should be off the market and we should just return to normal life, you are well supported by this international organization. They relied on many databases, but you can see with COVID-19, compared to other vaccines and drugs, the number of deaths that have occurred with the COVID-19 vaccine products has set all records in the history of medicine. The number of adverse events are far greater than even more commonly administered vaccines like influenza or tetanus. These vaccines are the most toxic and deadly vaccines by the data that we've seen in human medicine. Well, what do the vaccines do? What's the benefit of the vaccines? There are about 6,000 papers published on the benefits of the vaccines, 6,000. And in my view, they are all making false claims regarding the vaccines. The first claim is that they prevent infection with the current strain. They don't. The virus is quickly mutated, and every prior version of the vaccines is already out of. In the United States, we had so many breakthrough infections, our CDC gave up tracking them in the spring of 2020. The second claim is that the vaccine stopped transmission. Our CDC director came out in mid-2021 and said fully vaccinated, spread it to fully vaccinated people. The third claim is the vaccines make it less severe. They reduce hospitalization and death. Well, I've told you, a lot of Americans have already had COVID. That's actually the reason why there's reductions in hospitalization and death. It's antecedent infection, but there's no prospective, double-blind, randomized placebo-controlled trial of vaccines showing reductions in hospitalizations and deaths. There are hundreds of observational studies have intimated that result, and in my view, they're biased for the following reasons. One, COVID-19 hospitalization is not adjudicated, meaning they could be positive but be in the hospital for other reasons and not be clinically ill with the virus. Number two, the studies are not randomized, and they are influenced by selection bias. They don't account for who's received early treatment. And I can tell you patients who take a vaccine electively are far more likely to seek early treatment. I know that because I see it in my practice. And then on top of that, most of these studies don't have a fair representative sampling scheme. They simply are convenient samples of with and without vaccine status. And even the vaccine status is not fully ascertained. So in the United States, our electronic medical record. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and finish. Yeah. So I'm going to finish. And then we'll have plenty of time for a discussion. So what we is that in the United States, our electronic medical records, the default is unvaccinated. So a patient record remains unvaccinated unless the patient can prove that they've been vaccinated with a vaccine card. Many patients are sick and they don't bring their vaccine card. So many
vaccinated people are counted as unvaccinated due to this bias. The CDC has not shared the vaccine data set so we can actually do cross-linking of data. The CDC has kept that. And so for those reasons, the claim of reductions in hospitalizations and death is not justified. And then finally, an anticipated claim is that the vaccines will prevent a recurrence of the outbreak, and that hasn't been demonstrated. So manufacturers have railroaded the products through the FDA, raking in massive amounts of pre-purchase revenue. And that prominent doctors, in a sense, have been, slamming our public health officials. There with Jay Bhattacharya on the news regarding this idea of the whole pandemic, in a sense, as a crime against humanity. That the idea is the virus and the vaccines, as doctor has mentioned, that they have, in a sense, been used as some type of a tool to injure populations or cause change, global change worldwide. Our CDC, there is all this positioning, has announced overhauls and have had these admissions of wrongdoing already. We can see the positioning. And what I've said publicly is I've given more analysis and I've given more media commentator than her, than Fauci, than Jha, than Murthy, than Biden or Harris combined. I don't have any announcements of being incorrect on anything. I've changed my views as the viral pandemic has changed, but that's a natural scientific evolution. I do a lot of talking with expert doctors, so we have, our group understanding what's going on. But our public health officials have not done that. She hasn't made a single call to me. I have 60 peer-reviewed papers on it. And that's a low number because of the bias against publishing anything outside of a positive on the vaccine. So my final slide is that the call to action here is that all lockdowns worldwide, all the restrictions should be lifted. We should only test on label in acutely ill patients. And I would say at this point in time, on the first anticipated episode of the illness, we should recognize infection in all applications, because beyond that, it's the illness is like a common cold. Treat patients early, high risk, with a multi-drug regimen. And the drugs, honestly, don't really matter. It's a matter of covering the basis of the viral replication, cytokine storm and thrombosis. And then lab vaccine mandates. All the current products should be pulled off the market. I believe this is the right course. When all the vaccines are pulled off the market worldwide, there will be a full celebration. There's no doubt about it. It'll be almost like a victory day. So I'll stop there and yield the rest of my